My parents boycotted my wedding over my sister's honeymoon. Now they want to reconcile. I'm a 30-year-old man living in a mid-sized American suburb with my wife. My parents and younger sister used to live nearby, but everything unraveled around my wedding a few months ago. What started as a happy engagement turned into a rift so deep that we're only now, 3 months later, considering reconciliation. When my wife and I announced our engagement, my parents seemed supportive. My sister, however, saw it as an opportunity for herself. For years, she had been badgering our parents for a lavish vacation. Around the time of my wedding, she decided her upcoming honeymoon should be a luxurious tour of Europe, complete with first-class flights, five-star hotels, and guided tours across multiple countries. Initially, I didn't think much of her plans. She and her fiancé loved showy vacations, so it seemed in character. But then my mother called with a shocking request. Your sister wants help funding her honeymoon. Since you're the older brother, maybe you can chip in. I was taken aback. Chip in turned out to mean footing the entire bill. My father joined the conversation, insisting I pay because, as they put it, we already helped with your wedding. It's time to pay it forward. I was floored. Yes, they had contributed to my wedding, but nowhere near the tens of thousands her dream honeymoon would cost. When I asked why my sister and her fiancé couldn't cover their own expenses, my mother snapped, "You're the stable one with savings. We're too old to keep paying for everything. Be a good brother." I calmly explained that my wife and I were saving for a house and starting a family. Draining my funds for my sister's extravagant trip was out of the question. My father sighed and warned me to keep the peace in the family, but I stood firm. That refusal set off a firestorm. My mother called me selfish. My father threatened to boycott my wedding unless I agreed. My sister added fuel to the fire, texting me pictures of resorts and yachts with captions like, "This one's perfect, only $5,000 a night." A week before the wedding, my parents sent an email that read like a ransom note, "Fulfill your obligations or we won't come." I called their bluff, but on my wedding day, neither my parents nor my sister showed up. The absence stung deeply. My wife and I focused on celebrating with the people who supported us, but their betrayal loomed over the day. A month later, my sister's wedding took place, and I didn't attend. My parents fully funded her European honeymoon, taking out loans to cover the massive costs. Naively, they had underestimated the price of first-class flights, luxury accommodations, and gourmet dining. My mother later confessed to a relative that she was horrified by the final bills, but felt trapped. Meanwhile, my sister flaunted her trip on social media, seemingly oblivious to the financial strain she had caused. Watching from afar, I felt a bitter mix of vindication and sadness. 3 months passed without contact. My wife and I settled into married life, avoiding the subject of my family. Then one evening my phone rang. It was my mother. At my wife's urging, I answered. My mother's voice trembled as she said, "We made a huge mistake. Please, can we talk?" She admitted they had realized how unfair and costly their actions were. The debt they incurred paying for my sister's honeymoon had forced them to cut corners in their own lives. My father joined the call, uncharacteristically subdued, and acknowledged how irrational their boycott had been. When I asked about my sister, my mother sighed. "She still thinks you should have paid." That figured. My sister had always been indulged, and she wasn't about to change overnight. My parents, however, wanted to meet in person to apologize. After some thought, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe. My mother's eyes were red from crying, and my father looked deflated. They tearfully admitted their betrayal and how their actions had damaged our relationship. Hearing their apology was bittersweet. I appreciated their honesty, but couldn't ignore the fact that it took their own financial pain to see the truth. My wife reminded me to set boundaries, and I'm cautiously optimistic about moving forward. But I know trust takes time to rebuild. I sensed genuine remorse from my parents. The next challenge was deciding how to move forward. They asked for a fresh start, hoping to rebuild our relationship. To show their sincerity, they offered to host a belated, private family gathering to honor my marriage. It was their way of making amends for missing my wedding. I hesitated, wary of another fiasco, but my father insisted, "We want to show we respect your union, even if it's delayed." After discussing it at length with my wife, we agreed to give them a chance, on one condition: my sister's involvement would be minimal or non-existent. If she still harbored resentment, we didn't want more drama. My parents reluctantly agreed to keep the event small and discreet. When my sister learned about this reconciliation, she bombarded me with calls, demanding to know why she was being excluded. She ridiculed my parents for apologizing, claiming they were betraying her. In her venomous tirades, she accused me of manipulating them into funding our honeymoon. The irony was staggering. She still believed it should have been my bill. Her entitlement was unhinged. One call ended with her threatening, "You'll regret turning them against me." It became clear that she hadn't learned from her honeymoon fiasco. She expected everyone to bow to her demands. I told my mother about her messages, and she sighed. "She's furious we're acknowledging your feelings, not just hers." My mother explained that after returning from Europe, my sister had started demanding more money, complaining about wanting a bigger apartment or another vacation. My parents had reached their limit. Tired of her tantrums, they threatened to cut her off financially. My sister responded with accusations, claiming they cared more about me than her. My father finally saw how deep her entitlement ran. He and my mother told her they were done enabling her. She'd have to stand on her own. Furious, my sister stormed out, calling them ungrateful parents. On the day of the family gathering, my wife and I were cautious but hopeful. My mother prepared a simple lunch, and my father offered a heartfelt toast, acknowledging their mistakes. We exchanged hugs, and tears were shed. It felt genuine. For the first time in a long while, the tension in my chest began to ease. Over the next few weeks, my parents made consistent efforts to rebuild our bond, calling regularly, checking in, and even surprising us with a belated wedding gift. Meanwhile, my sister continued her meltdown, trying to rally relatives against us with tales of betrayal. Most saw through her entitlement. She eventually burned bridges with her husband's family as well, demanding money from them. A final confrontation occurred when my sister showed up unannounced at my parents' home. She raged about her financial struggles, demanding they cover her credit card bills from the honeymoon. My mother calmly refused, reminding her that she had already been given more than enough chances. When my sister turned her anger on me, my father lost his temper. "You can't blame him, or us, for your reckless choices. Grow up." Furious, she stormed out, threatening legal action with no basis. That was the final straw. My parents decided to disown her, at least temporarily, until she took responsibility for her actions. While I wasn't thrilled it had come to this, I understood. My parents realized that true love sometimes means refusing to enable toxic behavior. A month later, my wife and I hosted a small barbecue. My parents attended, relieved to have rebuilt our relationship. We laughed, shared memories, and planned future gatherings. The shadow of the wedding fiasco still lingered, but it no longer controlled us. My parents had learned a hard lesson about the consequences of enabling entitlement. As for my sister, she continues to drift, refusing to face how her actions isolated her. Perhaps one day, she'll understand. Until then, my parents remain firm, and so do I.